through some examples. Then we will talk about the new paradigm shift from traditional machine learning to graph machine learning, where we will introduce the concept of graph representation learning. Then in the third part, how this graph representation learning can be used in various biological or biomedical, bioinformatics application through some of the case studies. So majorly three part. We'll start with what is graph or why graph is important. Before moving to the sessions, like why this lecture is important or why we are taking this kind of topic. So why biomedical data? Because biomedical data in the sense or at the scope of this lecture, we'll discuss it as all kind of biological or medical data. For example, molecular data, some kind of imaging data or ECG or that kind of physiological signals, or even it can be health records, electronic health records. So analysis on this kind of data, it can be genetic data or it can be drug or molecular data, anything can be. It can be, it's used to analyze, diagnose and treat diseases or do some kind of analysis to get some prediction or inferences to characterization of the patient situation. So overall idea is a better health. And from a computational perspective, this biomedical data is high dimensional because it can have multiple features, multi-model in many cases, like we cannot capture entire feature just looking into one part, just looking into the genetics or just looking into the drug and disease interaction. We cannot get a complete picture. We have to capture multiple things, so multi-modality. In many cases, it may be noisy and sparse also. If you are looking for some kind of rare diseases, the data will be maybe very less. So it can be very sparse also. So if we are working on a classical ML like deep learning or any other like CNN, deep learning, LSTM, or any traditional machine learning algorithms on this kind of data, this approach may lack or may fail to capture most of the interactions between different modalities, because this biological process is not just one modality. It is an interaction between different things. So we want to capture these relations and to learn these relations through machine learning problems or machine learning approaches. We need a paradigm shift from traditional ML to graph machine learning. So we are talking in this context how we can use graph representation learning or graph kind of modeling on biomolecular or biological applications, biomedical applications, and how we can use machine learning or that how we can adapt machine learning technology that is specifically to graph. So that is the background, that is the scope we are going to discuss in today's lecture. So part one will introduce what is graph or where we can use graph or how graph can be used as a modeling technique. So we can say that graphs are everywhere. Let's take a very motivative example to understand why graph representation is effective. Suppose you have a data involving, say, herbs, compound, proteins, and diseases. Okay, you have, say, it's a kind of Ayurveda data. So you have herbs, their protein, chemical compounds are there, different proteins that interact, and this protein and this disease will be interacted. So in a traditional approach, you have this herbs H1, H2, H3. You have compounds like C1, C2, C3, and you have diseases like D1, D2, and their interactions like how compound and protein are interacted, how protein and diseases are interacted. That details are with you. So If you have a question like which herb can treat inflammation via biological interactions, this is your question. So your task is to find the question, answer to this question using this table. So the traditional approach or the classic approach on this situation is we have different database tables. We have to find a query. So we'll apply a query, SQL query, a relational query, select something from multiple tables based on some conditions. So select star from where or select from where approach we can apply. It is purely a kind of natural join. You have to join multiple tables. If you want to get an answer for this question, you want to join all these tables because the information C1 interact with protein, protein interact with disease. So this connection you will get only through joining these tables. So multiple table joining operation is required to find this answer. In this case, it may be easy because it's a very small database, but you look into the real-time database, which contain all the herbs, all the diseases, all the compound. So millions of records will be there. So joining on this kind of big databases to extract the relations, extract the answer for the query is quite expensive. So joining this is not a easy task in this example. So what alternative thing we can think, what we can do? So we need to join all these things, which is expensive. We want to think about some better method which can visualize the relationship. So if you are joining, there will be multiple rows, duplicate rows. Some components we have to repeat. So it will increase the number of records, increase the number of search space. So this is an expensive task which we cannot supposed to follow. What we can do in that case? So the other one option that you can have is based on the table relations what you have, you can convert it into a graph where this diseases, compounds, protein, herbs will be the nodes and their interactions can be represented through edges. For example, H1 interact with C1, C1 interact with P1 and P2, then P1 interact with D1, P2 interact with D2. All these relations you can capture now as a graph. Now, to answer the question, what is the question? Like, which is the inflammatory diseases? So, which are the herbs that interact biologically with the diseases? You can track the path from herbs to the diseases. Your disease is D1. So, from H1, you can find a path like this. From H1, you can find another path. H2, you can find a path. So, just following this path, which can be done in linear time, in number of like the complexity, the running time of this search will be in the order of number of edges. How many edges you want to traverse, which is always linear because we have a fixed number of edges. And you will get the answer very easily. So you can compare with what you have done now. You have tables, multiple tables. One option is you can perform a join operation. The other one, you will prepare a graph. So you are modeling the data relations as a graph and try to extract the answer through graph traversal. You take some path and the path it gives the answer. And traversal is a kind of linear time operation. So that is the power of graph. And if you look into the to the world, there are many natural graphs. For example, as we usually say, graphs are everywhere. Let me. So graphs are everywhere. For example, you can see the graphs in social media, where users will be the nodes and the relations or the edges will be their non or the relationship. For example, Rohan knows Priya, Priya knows Arav, Arav knows Neha. So this form a cluster, this form a group. Like the Facebook, there is they are using some kind of algorithm like a friend of friend, friend of a friend. because Rohan knows Ananya and Ananya knows Siddharth. So there is high chance that Rohan also knows Siddharth. So that kind of extra relations you can get when you represent this relation as a graph, or you can ask the question who is most popular, most friendly, who have most number of uh, friends, or who may be an outlier in this group, or who is most closed or more distant, or who is most connected. Can you suggest some friends for Priya or Karthik? So this kind of many questions you can ask in this kind of graph. Another network is citation network. You have set of papers, how the papers get cited, and this form a network. So suppose one paper cite the other. So which is most cited paper? Or how many of the like which are the different domains citing this particular paper? So as the citation increases, the impact of that research work is increasing. So you can model this as a graph, and you can ask many questions to the model. Or co-author network. You are writing a paper, you have a co-author, so you can have co-authorship with many others, or who is strongly connected with others, who is actually actively collaborating, who is not collaborating, how strong your collaborations are. Many questions you can ask to this question, ask to this co-author network. This is one another example. Google Map is an example. So maps again a network, transportation network. You can see the cities are connected through different routes. And now you can ask the questions like which is the shortest path, or which path is less dangerous or less uh, cost. Even sometimes the distance may be high, but cost is costly. Like cost is less. Which, like if you are looking for a transportation network, which will be the better route? So many questions you can ask in this to this network. Particular to this scope of this problem, this talk, we are talking about molecular or biomedical applications. So each molecules can be considered as a graph. Their interaction, the atomic interaction is a natural graph. And there are many natural graphs in biology. If you take the protein-protein interactions, different proteins are interacting each other. This is exactly a graph. Or you have gene-gene interaction or gene co-expression network. Like two genes are expressing in the same cell or same disease condition or this same biological condition, they are related. Or disease drug interaction, or drug target protein interaction, molecular chemical interactions. So many kind of interactions you can model as a graph, or you take the DNA secondary structure, a genetic secondary structure, or a tertiary structure. That is again a kind of graph. So multiple graphs you can see, and suppose you want to predict a new interaction, you want to predict a new drug, computer drug discovery. So you want to predict a new drug. So you want to predict a new interaction between a new component and a disease, existing disease. So this is a kind of graph problem again. So many graph can be seen. Protein-protein interaction we already mentioned. And so many examples are there. Internet document network. Like you can consider each document as a node. And if they share something common, some common words, some keywords, you can make a connection. Or ontology, knowledge graph, family relations, telecommunication network. There are many examples that use this graph to model real world problem. Or we can say that graphs are one of the universal language that used to model the relationship. And the challenge is, and once we represented this, we can ask many questions to the graph and use graph algorithms to extract the results. For example, which are the closest pairs or closest nodes in the graph? We can apply some kind of shortest path algorithm. We want to find the minimum distance. So the graph and the relationship can be used to infer many or mine many unknown things, new things, infer many additional information from the graph. But the challenge is how to unlock this potential data. Let's discuss more detail. For example, we have social network. We can ask about link prediction, suggesting some new connections. Or we want to find some communities which may be interested, like a special interest group. So now when an institute give a FDP announce, we get some people who are interested in this particular topic. So this is a special interest group. So we form a network from a social connection. This you may got this information through LinkedIn or some Facebook or some other platforms. So all are connected in some way or the other way in that network. And once you got this flyer, we form a special interest group. So this is this kind of community finding. Or in a molecular graph, you can ask about, like, you already have some connections. So based on that, for a new molecule, can you predict the new properties? Or can we do some kind of virtual screening to identify the new components from this graph relationship? Or can we do some kind of flow optimization in a transportation network? So there are many questions you can ask once you have a graph model. Okay. So complex domains have richer relationship structure, which can be represented as a relational graph. By explicitly modeling relationship, we achieve better performance. So the question is how we can model this relationship. Solution is graph, but how these relationships can be, like, we have a very big data which we cannot do manually, which we cannot analyze manually. So how the power of computation can be used to analyze this data. More specifically, how machine learning, which is one of the powerful tool to analyze this kind of big data, how we can use machine learning to analyze the big data which is represented, which is capturing the relationship through the graph structure. So that is the main question we want to use. So can we use the power of machine learning or deep learning algorithm to analyze this complex graph data problem? So before moving answering this question, we want to check how the current machine learning models are working. The most powerful tools like the transformer models, large language models, or CNN, or any other deep learning models, they are working on something like a grid data. For example, CNN take image data, which is basically a grid data structure, a matrix of pixels. Or a deep neural network will take a tabular data, or an LSTM or RNN or current transformer models, they take a sequence data, either as text or a speech, video, anything, they will give to the data. So they are particularly worked on simple sequence, grids, tables kind of data. But what we need, we have a graph structure, we have interactions represented as graph. So like images, can we feed this graph directly into a modern neural network to predict something? Can we do? Definitely no. Why? First of all, if you look into this graph structure, these graphs are arbitrarily sized compared to an image or a sequence of video or sequence of audio or a text. They have an arbitrary size, and they have, most importantly, they have a complex topological structure. They're not spatial. Unlike the grids, which are on the space, they have a different structure. And these are often dynamic and multimodal also. Most importantly, they does not preserve any kind of ordering or no reference point. If you take an audio, we have a start position and end position, or a text have a start and end. Image has a fixed boundary. And if you let's take a sequence of words. The boy ate apple. That sequence has a meaning. If you change the order, like the boy apple ate, it has a no meaning or a different meaning. So in traditional machine learning, the order is important. They preserve the information through the sequence or the order or the relations. But if you take a graph, there is no fixed reference point. Like you, for your convenience, we are mapping it as A, B, C, D, and all. But just the relations matters. We can represent that in another way also. The graph can be like graph isomorphism kind of issues you may know. So if you change the order of words, the sentence change meaning. If you rotate the graph in space, it does not change the network. Maybe the labels may change, but relations still preserve. So this property of graphs is normally called permutation invariance. So we want to work with models which are permutation invariant. We have to keep this in mind when we are dealing with the data. And data points are not independently and identically distributed. That is another problem. If you start learning like any other machine learning or algorithms, there is a assumption that data is coming from an IID distribution, independent and identical distribution. But if you see here, we cannot have, this data is not uh, independent. There is some relationship. The edge shows the relationship or the dependency. So we cannot say that this data or this data is independent in nature. So what we can see now that we are in a situation, we have lot of graphs where like many complex problem, we can model it as graph, but the powerful machine learning algorithms are not suitable to handle this complexity or this graph structure. They work on a different domain. Graph is in a spatial domain or a spectral domain. So this gap leads to a paradigm shift from the traditional machine learning algorithm, to a graph machine learning concept. So we must stop forcing in network into flat grid. So instead of say capturing all the relations, we can think about just an adjacency matrix which capture the relations. But and we can give that matrix to a traditional machine learning algorithm, which may work in some cases, but it is limited to one level of interactions. There are multi-hop interactions are there. So we cannot force the graph to form a matrix or a grid or a sequence of vectors. We want to capture the entire interactions in the graph. So we want to, given a graph, we may have to predict some target y. So we want to learn a function f based on the relationship, the topology. Topology is basically the adjacency matrix and other feature interactions within the graph. So this is what we normally call as a graph ML or machine learning on graph. And if such machine learning tasks are there, we can have core 4 tasks in this domain. For example, if we have a graph, we want to apply machine learning or graph ML algorithms to predict some node level information, node classification. For example, classifying a node as disease or not, classifying a patient as disease or not. So node level prediction, predict the property for an individual element within the network, basically the node. Or we can think about edge level prediction or edge level task. So we have the graph and some of the nodes are connected, some of the nodes are not connected. So can we predict new relationship between the nodes or kind of recommending a friend or predicting a new drug interaction or drug disease interactions? So this is another application. So we can think about node level actions, which are used to capture the properties of a node or capture the properties of an edge, or we can think about the entire graph. So different situations are represented by different graphs, and we want to do a graph classification. So classify or regress a single, we want to get a single representation or a single value for the entire graph, whether this graph is uh, 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 what I can say, a cluster, disease cluster or not. or whether this graph is predicting a molecular toxicity. Like if you are representing the molecule, the drug components as a graph, so each molecule will be a graph. So based on the graph interaction, or each drug will be a kind of molecular interaction, a particular graph. So we want to predict the toxicity amount from the interactions. And most importantly, we can think about representation learning. So in all this, the other three is a kind of prediction. Here we are not predicting. Given the graph, we want to get a embedding. We want to get a representation, a vector representation for the graph or an edge or a node that we can given to the machine learning algorithm or a deep learning algorithm to predict something, or not just prediction, any other task. A kind of self-supervised or a completely unsupervised reusable vector across all the three tasks. So this is where we want to use graph representation learning. So the idea is, or where we are now is, we have the graphs in many domains, and the current machine learning algorithms are not uh, apt or adaptable for the graph problem. So we want to use graph machine learning or a algorithm specific to graphs, which can learn either node level, edge level, or graph level tasks. So instead of focusing on this particular levels, most importantly or most general task that we can consider is graph representation learning. Given the graph, we want to learn some kind of representation. Representation in the sense a vector, or more specifically an embedding. It can be a node embedding, it can be a graph embedding, or it can be a edge level embedding. So we want to get an embedding, and this embedding can be used for either classification or clustering or any other task like node classification, link prediction. We'll see some applications. So now we are talking about how to do the graph representation learning. So what we discussed is a general outline. Now we are focusing on graph representation learning. Before moving in detail, as a word of caution, we are not going into any in-depth discussion on graph neural network. We'll just introduce what is graph neural network, or how GNN can be used for GRL, graph representation learning, and we'll talk about some applications, because graph neural network may be implementation maybe, or theoretical uh, discussion may be time taking. So the objective of this session is to give an overview of what is graph representation learning, independent of any particular algorithm or particular model. And I hope you are following. At any point you are, please feel free to interrupt me. Okay, so let's discuss about graph representation learning. So in short, graph representation learning aims to learn a lower dimensional vector representation. More specifically, we can call it as embedding of graph entities. Graph entities in the sense, it can be a edge level, it can be node level, or even it can be graph level, with the condition that this learned representation should preserve structural, relational, and semantic information of the graph. That means whatever be the topology, whatever be the relations within the original graph. So we are mapping the graph or a node from the current dimension to a new dimension set. So this mapping is learned through a graph method. It can be matrix factorization. We are focusing on graph neural network. So graph neural network, like when we are feeding a graph, every node or every edges in this graph will be modeled into a higher dimensional or a different dimensional space. We call it as a latent dimension, hidden dimension. In that hidden dimension, suppose in the original dimension, two nodes are similar, that similarity should be preserved in the latent dimensions too. So this can be done for representing nodes, edges, subgraphs, or entire graphs as a feature vector. Like that depends on the task. If you are doing a graph classification, you can represent the entire graph as a embedding. So for every graph, you will have an embedding. Or if you are working at a node classification within the graph, each node will be represented by a graph, an embedding. Or you can represent a set of nodes, or a subgraph can be represented as a embedding. So that depends on the task. You can represent the nodes, edges, subgraphs, or the entire graphs as a feature vector, and enabled relate traditional machine learning to or deep learning algorithm to work on the graph structure data. And this is one of the foundational use of graph neural network. Why this graph representation learning is important may be the next question. Why? Because we already saw many real world data which are often relational data, or they have the dependency between the data points. They're not independent. So these methods, especially graph neural network, they are mean to capture more complex interaction among the entities. So when we'll discuss about how the graph neural networks are working, basically they use both the topology, that means the interaction, the direct interaction between the nodes, the relationship. Along with that, we'll also add some attributes to the nodes. So nodes have the topological relations. Other than that, they have some properties. For example, if you are taking a molecular graph, each molecule, they are interacting with the neighboring molecule. Along with that, each molecule has some set of properties. Maybe their color, maybe their atomic properties. So that will be the features. So it use both topology as well as node or edge level attributes, features, and that will be used to get the complex, like the node embedding graph representation. And most importantly, this graph is not in Euclidean space, so it can capture all the irregularities in this non-Euclidean data structures, and we can use this, like as many the advantage of any deep neural network is automatic feature extraction instead of specifically representing all the features. So given the features and the topology, this graph representation learning models can learn or automatically learn task specific representations more effectively. And they preserve the local and global graph structure, learn expressive representation without manual engineering feature. We already mentioned they support semi-supervised, supervised, or any other paradigm. Improves prediction accuracy on graph, like many advantages you can see. And there are many tasks that you can use. Major tasks include node classification, classifying a node. We'll see some example in the upcoming application part. Or it can be node clustering, it can be link prediction, graph classification, or identifying some subgraph communities detection, graph generation. You want to like given a set of relations, you want to generate similar graphs, or some recommendations, link prediction, or a ranking of different entities. So many such application you can find within the data, within this GRL application. And there are multiple techniques. We are focusing on graph neural network. Other than that, many traditional approaches are there. For example, matrix factorization can be used. Like you have the graph, which is represented by a matrix, uh, maybe Laplacian matrix or other representation, and that you can use to you'll apply different matrix factorization technique like eigenvalue decomposition or singular value decomposition kind of technique you will apply, and you will learn the features. That is the initial methods. Then the second stage of application include random walk based embedding. For example, node to vec or deep walk. You will construct you will take the graph starting from an arbitrary node. You will perform some random walks. Walk means a traversal through the graph. you will get a, maybe that depends on the algorithm, maybe not to wake if you are taking, you will perform some fixed length random walk on the graph. So you will get different graph and take this graph as different sequence of words in the as in the text. So you will get different sentences. The random walks will be different sentences, and nodes will be the walk words. So you will get a sequence of words, different sequence of words. Then apply algorithm like word to vec. In NLP, there is an algorithm called skipgram modeling, like word embedding modeling. Algorithms are the skipgram or continuous bag of algorithm. So they apply a skipgram algorithm here to get the word embedding from this random walk sequence, not the word embedding, node embedding. Similar to that, there is deep walk algorithm, which will use a different concept. Current or the state of art models use graph neural network. So instead of using this random walk approach and a feed forward neural network to capture this embedding, the limitation of this method is these embeddings will be kind of sparse. So we need a more dynamic, dense embedding. So people are looking for a different approach, which is called a graph neural network. For example, graph convolutional neural network or graph sage, graph attention, graph transformers. We can find a n number of models under the category of graph neural networks, which basically working to get the graph representation or graph embedding. So graph neural network, for simple understanding, are a neural network approach. We are using a neural net. We are creating a neural network which can take the graph, that in the sense the node features and their interaction, neighborhood interactions, and aggregate the neighbor information, and based on that it will update the feature vector of the each node. So that can be done in different approaches. GCN use graph convolution. So as in the CNN, they apply a convolution operation to more effectively capture the aggregation or the message passing. Or graph attention use multi-headed attention as in the transformers to capture this interaction. Or graph transformers or graph formers use transformer like self-attention, multi-headed attention to encoder decoder model for in capturing. Graph autoencoders are there, variational graph encoders are there, relational GCNs, many variants you can see, which the basic idea will be how they are doing the message passing aggregation or kind of learning. So let's understand how graph neural networks are working for this particular item. So GNNs are a deep learning framework for learning this representation, specifically for node level interaction, node level feature capturing. Like basically they are getting an embedding for nodes, and this can be extended to either graph level or even edge level. So each node iteratively aggregate information from its neighbors. This process is called neural message passing. So each node has a message as a feature, initial feature that depends on the task. For example, in a social media network, it can be the degree centrality, or it can be the immediate neighbors. It can be the type of the node. Many information we can give. Maybe the age of the person or the interest of the person. Many feature like the normal features in the traditional machine learning. Each node will have a set of feature that is fixed. Every node in the graph have a fixed set of feature vector. That will be the message. And during this message passing process, each node aggregate the information from its neighbors. This aggregation is a kind of linear combination like the neural network. So this aggregation is performed by a neural network. It will capture the information from different nodes and create a new updated message. So in the next iteration, this message will be passed to the next level. So maybe in the first iteration, it will consider the immediate node, immediate neighbors. In the second iteration or second layer, it will go to the stew hop, like neighbor of the neighbor. In that information may be captured. In that way, if we go for a K iterations, k layers, the k-hop interactions can be captured and the message will be updated according to this k-hop interaction. This help to get more feature or how they are interacting with the model, and accordingly we'll get the feature vector. Like this initial feature vector may be of dimension d, and during this interactions at each layer, this will be transformed into a new higher dimension, maybe a new latent dimension. We are not saying higher dimension. Sometime we will do the feature reduction also. You know how a neural network is converting a vector into a different dimension. The same way, each node features, aggregated features, will pass through the neural network and we'll apply non-linearity like softmax or sigmoid or ReLU function, and this will be transformed into a new dimension. This process will be repeated. And finally, we will like at the end of the final neural network, we'll get a k-hop relations represented by a new dimensional latent feature. So node representations are updated using maybe the node features and the immediate features and based on how they are connected. After multiple layers or multiple iteration, we say embedding capture both local as well as global graph structure. And this learned embedding can be used for node classification, link prediction, graph classification, or even clustering and visualization. This image will tell you how this is happening. For example, you have the graph. This is a biomedical graph. You have protein, gene, disease, drug, pathway, and many other interactions are there. And links predict the interaction, like visualize the interactions. So graph with nodes, entities, and edges relationship. This will pass to the messaging. So suppose you take this particular blue node, it has the connection with this nodes. So it will capture the interaction. So this collection, and accordingly, each node has a feature. So layer 0, we have an input feature. At layer 1, this will be updated through a neural network. So for each node, this feature will pass through this node embedding by collecting the information from others. Neighboring nodes will get a new embedding. So aggregation and transformation. There are two steps happening. One, like for each node in the graph, we are talking about one layer of the graph neural network. It will capture the messages. Messages is basically the input feature. If you take the layer 0, this is basically the input feature. The message is input feature. So it will aggregate the neighbor's message and its own message. So it now the node has a new message, new vector that will be transformed using a neural network to another layer. This will be done for all the nodes, and that is one layer. Then in the second layer, these features will be like it will go for us two iterations. Like node representations are iteratively updated using node features, neighboring features, and the graph structures. And at k layer may be there. So finally, we'll get an embedding for each of the node. This learned representations are basically the embedding or node embedding. So each node has the corresponding embedding now. Or we can like if you this is node embedding. If you take a pair of nodes, you can capture the edge embedding also. Based on that, you can aggregate to like you can do a addition. Like if you want to represent an edge embedding, you can add two node embeddings, or you can do some dot product between two, not dot product. You can have a point element wise multiplication of two node embedding to get the edge embedding. Or if you take the average of all the node embedding, you will get the graph embedding. So in many way, this node embedding, so a graph neural network basically learns a node embedding, which can be extended to either node or graph level embedding. And this embedding then you can use for any of the downstream tasks like drug discovery or disease gene identification, protein-protein interaction, or any kind of similarity prediction or other biomedical tasks, you can use it directly. So a graph representation learning means from the graph, we want to get this kind of embeddings which can be used for this downstream task. This is in short what a graph neural or graph representation learning means and what a graph neural network can do. Okay, now let's understand some of the application where this graph representation learning can be used. I hope you are with me. What we discussed so far is the power of graph representation or importance of graph representation in many of the real world applications, especially in biomedical data, and why we need graph neural network to learn the representations. Now the third question is, or third part is, how we can use this learned representation, this learned embedding in different biomedical applications. So we will discuss 4 applications we will discuss. 3 of them are our own work, what we did maybe as my part of my PhD work or what we are currently doing at IIIT Kottayam. We have a lab there, CLC lab. So as part of CLC lab, what our research scholars are doing is based on that. And one work is a latest work I found in literature. So 4 works we'll see which are more or less similar. The approach is more or less similar, only the task may be different. You can understand how this is working. Okay. So the question is why graph representation learning is important for biomedical data. As you already know, the biological systems are naturally represented as network. This can capture complex interaction among biomolecules. And you can see many such natural biological networks graphs, and they majorly heterogeneous with multimodality. So that complexity, that interactions needs to be captured effectively. And the results are very like if you are getting a good result, that impact in the society, like healthcare is one of the most trending research or most demanding research domain. Most of the people are interested, like everyone want to improve the quality of the life, quality of health. So the impact of this interpretation of the like result will be very high on society. So the first work that we are going to discuss is our own work is done with my scholar, Miss Amrita Kumari. So the work is graph representation of multi-omic data for improved breast cancer subtype prediction. So the problem here is, you know what is breast cancer and all. So uh, clinically, this breast cancer data is divided into uh, majorly five subtypes like luminant A, luminant B, nominal, HER2, and basal. So there are 5 subtypes of breast cancer. The subtype classification is based on the severity of this the cancer type, or how they progress, or how they will impact. Like nominal means it's normal. Luminant A is more is less spreading compared to the other one. Like many properties are there. So this subtype classification is based on their histopathological different properties. So what this work is doing is, this proposed workers will take uh, uh, different patients. There are many publicly available data. One data set that we are going to we are used in this workers metabolic data set. So from the metabolic data set, there are around 1,000 patients with their represents their features. So like if you see the earlier works in breast cancer or any other cancer subtype data based on this omic data, omic in the sense this genomic, proteomic, transcriptomic data. So they use either gene expression or clinical data to do this kind of analysis. But the current trend is how the multimodality or the interaction between multiple omic data type can be integrated to give some results. So in this work, we are using multi-omic representation, like each patient, the corresponding gene expression, DNA methylation is an epigenetic factor, then miRNA expression, microRNA expression, then clinical copy number alteration, how the mutations happen. Then there are some information from clinical data like age and all of the test results. So such kind of 7 modalities are used to represent the patient. So each patient will be represented, each patient features will be represented by this kind of features. And if you see the methodology, based on this features, clinical, GSC, many other features, after doing all the pre-processing, graph is constructed in such a way that, like for each of these features, we take the features. For each patient, we'll compute the, based on these features, we'll compute the similarity, patient similarity. So we can take the Euclidean distance between two features because two patients, each patient is represented by a vector based on these multi-omic features. So a feature engineering is performed. We combine the features, so we'll get a combination of 3 features based on the pre-processed data. So we represent this as a graph based on the similarity, patient similarity. So we take the distance and apply KNN, K nearest neighbor based graph construction. We'll put K equal to some 10 or 20. So each 20 closest pair will be connected. Like if you take node A, its 20 neighbors will be, like from A, there will be connection to 20 neighbors. In that way, a graph is constructed. Then, based on this graph, for each of the node, each of the patient, the embeddings will be extracted using a graph convolutional network. So feature extraction is done using a graph convolutional network. And based on these features, we use a graph autoencoder. We use this feature, this embedding to given to a graph autoencoder, which will train to classify each node as the particular subtype based on the node embedding, based on the feature we learn from the graph. So GCN is used for the feature extraction, and a graph autoencoder is used for the final classification. And the interesting thing is, we tried it with both graph as well as non-graph methods, and graph-based method outperform all the other methods, non-graph method, non-graph representation based method in the results. So this is, like, if you see the overall result here is around 90s, whether the other two are, like, I couldn't change this 1 minute. 0.933, whether the autoencoder and attention-based model, the non-graph-based method, cannot reach this result. So this is one way we can use a graph representation for classifying the patient similarity graph. So the main thing that you cannot hear is, first the graph, the patient or patient data is converted into a graph, a patient similarity network, and graph neural networks are used to get the features or the embeddings from the graph, patient similarity network, and these embeddings are used for the classification. It's a kind of multi-class classification. The next work is very similar but on a different problem. We have done as part of my PhD work. This is basically DB and LDA. We use a deep belief network based representation learning. Again, deep belief network is somewhat a graph older graph. It is not purely graph neural network, but it uses a probabilistic graph model to learn the representation. So they used to learn how non-coding RNA and disease are associated. For example, so before moving to what it is, uh, you must know what is LNC RNA means. So LNC RNA, long non-coding RNA, is a kind of non-coding RNA. So there are coding RNAs and non-coding RNAs in like we have DNA, RNA, protein. So from DNA we'll get some DNA is transcribed into RNAs, and this RNA, some part of the RNA may be translated into protein. So those part of the RNA which produce proteins are basically the coding RNA, while the others, there are many non-coding RNA which will not translated into proteins. They have the regulatory function. They may interact, they may help in different protein synthesis process. So they have regulatory action. So long non-coding RNA is a kind of regulatory RNAs in our biological system. So we want to predict how this LNC RNA interact with different diseases, whether this LNC RNA, a particular LNC RNA and disease are associated or not. To do this purpose, we propose DB and LDA, which is a multi-view graph. So in the previous work, if you see, we have one graph for all the patients based on different modality. Here also we can see a kind of multimodality. We use three kind of interaction. One is LNC RNA microRNA interaction, then LNC RNA disease interaction association, and disease microRNA interaction. So we have three different nodes. One is LNC RNA, microRNA, and disease. Okay, and how they are interacting. So these interactions we represented using three simple graph. One is LNC-RNA, miRNA interaction, disease miRNA interaction, and LNC-RNA disease association. Then, now this is a graph. To get the graph representation, the graph embedding, we use Node2Vec. So at that time, Node2Vec was very popular. So still it is popular, but we have more intense graph neural network based methods. So Node2Vec is a random walk based method. So we use graph Node2Vec to get the graph embedding, the node embedding from each of this multi-view graph. For each of the modality interaction, we have a separate graph. From each graph, we will learn the embedding of LNC RNA disease. So from first two graph, LMS and DMS, we'll take the node embedding of LNC RNA. And from here, from disease microRNA interaction, we'll take the embedding of disease also. So LNC-RNA disease interaction will get. And this is already non-interactions. So from this non-interaction, we'll take L and D, both the embedding of LNC-RNA and disease. So we have LNC-RNA embedding, disease embedding, and LNC-RNA disease embedding. We'll pass this embedding through a deep belief network. So it is a kind of probabilistic neural network that will give again, like the graph neural network, they will give an embedding. So from L and D, they will be combined and we'll get a latent representation in this space. And here also from L and D, here also we'll get. We will concatenate this to embedding. From here, we'll get LND, and we are also here from here also we'll get LNC-RNA disease embedding. We'll concatenate and pass through another DBN. So three DBN networks are there. One for this combination, one for this particular this one, and they will be combined, and we'll get the final embedding. This will pass through an attention layer, and a neural network, a feed-forward classifier is here that will do the classification. It's a kind of binary classification, like whether this particular LNC RNA and disease are associated or not. So we do the test training split. We first train the model, then an unknown or a new LNC RNA disease pairs are given. We will predict whether they are associated or not. And we compared it with most of the state of the art model. LNCRNA disease association prediction is one of the very popular problem. Still, it is relevant. You can see many graph-based papers are coming even in 2026. So at that time, we got a result of around 0.963, which is very comparative with respect to the RFLDA. But the most important part is it's uh, the area under precision recall curve is very high compared to most of the state of art models. So that give a very important that indicate the power of graph representation. The other methods use random forest or that kind of algorithms, traditional algorithm, but DPN LDA capture this properties using in a better way. That's why the improved results in this particular case. The third work, in the previous work or previous two work, we have used graph representation learning for a kind of classification task. Okay. Now we are using it for clustering. We will use the learned features, the learned embedding from the not to work or from the DBN LDA, DBN, deep belief network, that can be used for clustering the articles, clustering the LNC RNAs particular to a disease. So we take it as a case study. We want to learn how this LNC RNAs are working in heart failure. Like there are we work with a particular disease. We take a special case of heart failure. We take all the association of LNC RNAs and heart failure related diseases, heart failure and LNC RNA interactions, and prepare a graph. So this is the idea. We first collected the data. We take the LNCRNA and microRNA expressions. So three things we take. One is LNCRNA, long non-coding RNA. Then microRNA, another important non-coding RNA. Then mRNA, which is basically the gene expression. So this we can get it from GEO database, gene expression omnibus. So we did some kind of screening, like we kept some p-value equal to 0.05 and we do some log 2 fold changes and identified. So basically this will get the data for both normal and disease person. So a control group and a disease group will be there. So gene expression for both control group and disease group will be collected. Then we will do a kind of differential gene expression analysis, like which are the genes are differently expressed in both disease and which are the genes differently expressed in controlled group and the other group, the disease group. So only differentially expressed LNCRNA, miRNA, and messenger RNA will be were taken, and we'll understand their interactions, how different genes are interacting, how different LNCRNA gene interaction, miRNA gene interaction, all this kind of interactions we will take it from a publicly available database like LNC base, TAR base, that kind of databases were used to collect this interaction information. And based on this information, we constructed a co-expression network of LNCRNA, miRNA, and disease. Then from this graph, we capture the graph embedding using different methods. We apply a node embedding to get the node corresponding embedding, pass through features like DBNLDA, deep belief network, and this deep belief network will give a vector embedding. And this embedding is like we'll cluster using a topic model based algorithm. So what we did here is we constructed a graph, capture the graph embedding, and this embedding is passed to this DBN. DBN will give a latent representation, and based on this representation, we perform the clustering. Then once clustered, we identify the key LNC RNAs and their interacted genes, apply some gene enrichment analysis. So we identify which are the diseases or which are the pathways where this genes interacting with this key LNC RNA are active. So we identify we try to link LNC RNAs with the pathways. And we identify the pathways where the LNC RNAs are very highly active. And finally, we could identify some of the LNC RNAs which are biomarkers in heart failures. So this LNC RNA, the key LNC RNA identified by this pathway analysis, can be used as a therapeutic agent, therapeutic target for treatment of heart failure. That was the main result got from this cluster analysis. With respect to today's talk, what we did is we have the graph modeling and we use different graph features, learn from this interaction graph, and pass through a neural network to get the corresponding representation. And this representation is clustered. So here we are not doing any classification. We want to analyze, we want to perform a descriptive statistics. So we did an analysis using clustering and identify the key LNC RNAs in different clusters. And based on that, we got the final analysis. This is what we did with GRL, like graph representation learning, for identifying long non-coding RNAs in heart failure. Then the last one is I adapted from a recent paper by Wang et al., published in 2025. So this paper is basically for how the graph representation learning using graph neural network is used for drug discovery, one of the most important area in biomedical analysis applications. So in this example, what we are doing here is we have a graph. So a molecular graph is there. So molecule itself is a graph. Each molecule has some node features and the corresponding edge features. So this molecular graph is fed to a GNN to get the embedding. Similarly, the gene expression is passed through a CNN to get the embedding, passed through a attention network separately for this two embedding. Like molecular information is coming from is a graph, so we can get the information. We can get the embedding using a GNN, graph neural network. They use I think graph convolutional network itself, and CNN is used to get get an embedding of gene expression. So for each gene expressed in this condition, like based on the gene expression, we'll get a embedding. Pass through an attention layer and a normalization layer. We'll get the corresponding embedding and the drug embedding. So drug is basically the molecule. We combine them, pass through a dense layer, and we'll get an output. The output is basically whether the gene expression and the drug is interacting. So the architecture beyond proposed is explainable graph gene disease prediction or gene drug prediction for drug response and mechanism prediction. So molecular graph, node features and edge features are extracted from the drug molecule, and GNN is used for the learning latent features of the drug. And CNN is applied to compress the gene expression features from cancer cell line. Then two multi-head cross-attention and normalization layer combine drug and cell features, and the drug response is predicted with the integrator feature. So we integrate these features So these features are extracted using a graph, neural network, and a CNN. They integrate these features and finally do the classification whether they are the drug is responding or not on this particular gene expression. In that way, they are making the prediction. And you can find so many other applications. We are not exploring all the things, but you can see how the graph representation learnings are used for many other applications related to bioinformatics or biomedical things. Like you can take clinical data or EEG signal you can represent as a graph, or the patients based on EHR record you can represent and find and you can get some inferences. And there are many other applications where, like, if you can represent this data as a graph, then you can combine, you can apply the graph representation learning technique to infer the knowledge from this kind of graph. With this, let me conclude what we discussed so far. We started with the power of graph representation, or we started with the question why graph, why not the sequence or grid kind of data. So graph can capture relationship beyond the tabular form or the grid structure. And graph neural network is one of the method that can be used to get richer representation of this graph, like graph representation learning. So GRL in particular, we convert this graph into or a node into a particular embedding. This embedding will capture all the relationship whatever we require. And this there are many biological graphs. We like applications have many natural graph, and GRL enables like this graph representation enable more understandable, improved models for biomedical applications. What we discussed is some of the application and many other application you can explore. You can start working on it. Specifically, if you are working in research domain, this could be one of the topic. Like whenever you have a graph, you can use graph specific models to learn their embedding, and then this embedding can be used for other useful tasks in the domain. And this session is intended to give an overview of how GRL can be used in biomedical application. I know most of the applications are related to bioinformatics or genetics because I'm working in that domain. I have a kind of bias in that. So sorry for that. And this is not an in-depth discussion on graph neural network or GRL because that is also out of the scope of this particular 1 or 1.5 hour session. But I hope you got an idea of how graph representation learning can be used or what is meant by graph representation learning. And this is not limited to biomedical data. You can think in any domain if you are working in security. So different entities related. So it can be a kind of interaction. So wherever there is a kind of relation interactions and that can be represented as a graph, this graph representation learning has a scope. So it is not just related to biomedical or biological application. You can find many uh, uh, other application or like beyond this, you can find many applications where this graph representation learning concepts can be used and that make the real world system more intelligent. So once again, thank you for your patient listening. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take it up.
Participants, if you have
എനിക്കൊന്ന് ഫൈൻ
if you have any questions, you can ask in the chat box or you can unmute and ask. So there is a question in the chat box.
pursue graph representation learning research, what concepts should they master first, and what skills they would recommend develop throughout college. Okay, so if you want to start understand graph representation learning or graph neural network in particular, uh, you should have a very good understanding of how deep learning models are working, especially basic feed-forward neural network. And what GNN is doing is trying to adapt all the concepts from deep learning to for graphs. So a thorough understanding of deep learning framework is essential to understand graph representation learning. Particularly, some of the resources that could be used are this two things. One is for getting the foundation, you can use the first textbook, Graph Representation Learning by William Hamilton, or there is a online course from Stanford University by Les Kovic, who is basically an author of many of the GNN models, like not GCN, GAT, and many other models are authored by their team from Stanford. So this online resource is available. So this can be used to take up the mod, please. So basically, you should have the like you should be comfortable in deep learning. Then easily you can adapt or you can understand the graph representation learning concept. Okay.
Any other questions? So we haven't received any queries now. So I think we will wind up the session.
Sure.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, sir, for your time and for sharing your expertise with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. And thank you to the participants. And we will see in the next session, which is starting at around 4. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.